right. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for being with us, both in person and we have a few folks joining online as well. And I think more will trickle in. So yeah, thank you very much for being here. It's been a pretty nice few days of work. So thanks for spending some time with us this evening. I'm Courtney Bobson. I'm a research scientist here at ONRC. And I'm not often here in person for the talks. I'm often on Zoom. So it's really special to get to be here with you today. Just a few things of housekeeping before we get started. First off, there is coffee, hot water, and tea and cookies in the back. Please feel free to grab some if you would like it. Just through this door to the left, there are bathrooms if you need it. And this is our final talk in our spring series. Then we'll take the summer off because it is too nice to spend a lot of time inside in the summertime, right? So we're going to take a break and we'll return back in September for more evening talks. So this evening we have Jeff McGinley. He's our presenter. He is going to present on his work at Pacific Forest Management and the various management strategies that landowners on the peninsula use. Together, Jeff with his wife Linda and the staff at Pacific Forest Management, or PFM, have built the company into a trusted partner for forest landowners for 28 years. Jeff is a 1982 alum of Pacific College's Forest Technology program and spent 15 years working for DNR before starting PFM in 1997. And I just wanted to also mention before we really get rolling that these talks are really funded through the Roseman Family Education Fund, an endowment that honors the contribution of Fred Roseman and his family to forestry and the forest community. And Tom, I'm really grateful you can be here on Zoom today. Who is kind of dealing with some back problems and can't be with us in person, but yeah, we're so grateful to him and his family. So with all of that, welcome, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me tonight. Tom contacted me back in last fall and said, you know, can you come talk to us about the new land ownership out in the Dickey with the Rainier property and things like that. And so I agreed to do that, and after several postponements, finally got something scheduled. So I'm really glad to be here. I'll refer here to a couple times to a map here on the wall, so that'll be there. I'm a forester, so I'm a map guy, and but we're mainly going to talk about management strategies because as a forestry consulting company, we work for many different landowners. And so we sort of see how the different strategies that are employed by different companies, different agencies, things like that. So it's sort of interesting. I have this kind of hypothesis that I'll tell you about here in a minute, but this kind of feeling that we could learn something by looking at what everybody, as far as forest landowners, do in kind of a big picture way. So that's what we're going to talk about here tonight. And then we'll talk a little bit about EFM, who is the new owner of about 2/3 of the Rainier property. So Pacific Forest Management, we're a consulting forestry firm based here in Forks since 1997. We have about 12 staff, a couple seasonal employees. Very thankful with we have a working relationship with ONRC here to help staff some of our put up some of our summer employees here in the dorm, so that's super helpful. But we work in the coastal areas, primarily of Washington and a little bit down in Oregon. We specialize in helping landowners meet their forest management goals, and sort of like I alluded to, different companies, different agencies have different goals, and so we're gonna dig into that a little bit tonight. The number one question I get from people that don't know anything about forestry is, what does a forestry consultant do? And so, well, somebody told me once a long time ago, forester told me that a forester knows a little bit about everything and a lot about nothing. So in other words, we have to have a lot of hats, and we have to have a lot of different skills. So Um, primarily to kind of sum it up, we provide services to landowners for what they need. A lot of what they need around here is permits. The permitting system is pretty arduous. It's on the burden of the landowner to prove various things before they can harvest. And so we help landowners meet their goals by permitting. Sometimes they just want to know what their trees are worth. So we'll go out and we'll look at their trees and estimate the value. We'll do forest management plans. If you own forest land in Washington State and you want to have it enrolled in the forestry exemption program, you have to do a forest management plan. That gives you a significant break in your property taxes. Forest inventories. The forest inventory you can think of like your bank account. The forest landowners want to know what they have out in the forest, whether it's for financial reasons or biological reasons, and what kind of trees do they have, what ages are they, how big are they, things like that. We do a lot of silviculture contract work. That would be, we work with tree planting contractors, thinning contractors, invasive species control. So we'll write contracts, hire a contractor, make sure they have their insurance, make sure they do their job correctly. Timber harvesting, road building, road maintenance, conservation strategies. There's a number of different conservation programs that are open to small and large landowners that may fit their needs better than others. So we can talk about those things. And really a big one is compliance with all laws. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Our clients, we have 30 plus clients on our client list. These are just kind of the major ones. PFM Investments, they're the ones here in the light, the kind of lime green here that bought about 2/3 of the Dickey and Goodman property. PFM Investments, other large forest landowners. We work for most anybody that you could mention that owns land up here or over here or down here that's a private landowner. We do work for them depending on what they need. Indian tribes are a big customer. If they have forest land, a lot of times all they'll have is like fisheries staff. So we'll come in and help them do things that they need to do on their forest, like inventory or reforestation, things like that. Government agencies, Nature Conservancy is one of our clients. Of course, very small private landowners too. People a lot of times have owned property for many years. And they'll get phone calls or letters out of the blue, say, hey, we want to give you this for your timber, And let's just say it never works out. So give us a call if you need some free advice on that. We'll come look at that for you. So narrowing down here now a little bit to strategies. So there's different strategies that landowners will employ for their forest land. Every client's unique, they have their own goals. We'll talk about that. And their goals determine their strategy. So let's look at some of those factors that really drive why is a company doing what they're doing out there. So there's many factors, but these are kind of three big ones here is what kind of landowner is it? Is it a corporate landowner, institutional landowner, a tribal landowner, a small landowner? Every landowner type is going to have their own objectives, and we'll talk about that. State forest practice rules. All private and state forestry operations are subject to Washington State forest practice rules. The reason why I said minimum standard in some cases, the tribes quite often employ the DNR standard for protection of their streams and things like that. So the DNR is, I don't know if I'd want to say the gold standard, but it's used by more than just private industry. It's used by tribes too. Another factor influencing the strategy is certification. And we'll talk about that. Okay, so first we want to try to understand a little bit about land ownership. If we look at this map, I think this one's brighter, so I'll go with it. So the areas in the dark blue are DNR lands, DNR managed lands. And the gray lands are mostly corporate or institutional owners. I think Wes from Campbell Global was here. So this would be like Campbell Global up through here. Maryland Ring over here toward Fish. Down here on the Hoe, what gray areas are food growers. And so those are like the major kind of corporate or institutional landowners. The West End has very little small private forest land ownership. Most of our land is either held by a timber company or is DNR or federal or something else, but very little private. The flow green then is EFM. We'll talk about them. Brown is tribal. So primarily up here, the macaw, the clue, the hoe. And then the orange is conservation land. Down on the hoe, the Clearwater, that would be Nature Conservancy primarily. So let's talk about that. This is sort of a important distinction between landowners. So corporate ownership is responsible to shareholders. So that would be like often that's like S&P 500 company. So they report like our earnings for next quarter are projected to be this. Well, they have to try to meet that, and so they have a different standard than some of these other groups of owners. Corporate ownership said often coincides with securing long-term mill supply. So out on the West End, back in the day, Rainier owned a lot of property. They accumulated a lot of property from Lodell, from Milwaukee, from different other ownerships to feed their mills in Port Angeles. They had Penn Ply, they had the pulp mill, and so they wanted to secure the supply for their mills. But the distinguishing factor really is the financial returns. Are the financial returns. So I don't know if there's some of you guys would remember back in the 80s, there was this period of time when corporate takeover was a big thing. And it was like, well, that's what happened with Crown Zellerback. That was taken over by Goldsmith. And then it went to Hanson. Went through 3 or 4 hands, supposedly like there's this poker game, all that. But the reason for the takeover was the next guy said, I can do better returns. And so I can do better returns was when Burnt Mountain got liquidated. Remember that all got logged in the late 80s, early 90s, right, during those changes in ownership. So, and how many times did you hear back in the day, Rainier's gonna cut and run. We're logging everything. And they had the big Citifor sale where they sold the timber rights to thousands of acres to Citifor, a Chinese company. And a lot of what they sold was, big old timber. And they gave them like a 10-year contract on their lands. Well, the reason they did it, the bottom line is to be competitive. The market, at that time in 80, 81, 82, that we were in a housing crunch or a depressed housing market. And a lot of people defaulted on their state timber contracts. I mean, it was a dire situation for timber companies. That was their out. They got thousands and thousands of dollars and were able to retain ownership of the property. So that's a pressure that's on a corporate owner that may not be on one of these others. So just for understanding, not justifying it one way or another, but that's the way it is. Institutional investors, they're pretty much in the business of managing money for others. Teachers funds, life insurance funds, all this money accumulates and they want an investment that will provide stable steady returns. Forest land falls in that category of stable, steady, because with forest land investment, you can derive your income from a combination of the trees are growing every year, whether you cut them or not. So tree growth is more dollars on the balance sheet because there's more volume next year. Land appreciation, any real estate agent will tell you the prices they don't go down, they go up over time. So the land value appreciation and then reoccurring income from timber harvest and things like that. So forest land is a really attractive investment for institutional investors because they can add that to their portfolio where maybe they have some, higher risk S&P 500 stuff here, and they have this maybe lower risk here to anchor the investment. Third group would be social. So this would be sort of like camel group. I would kind of fall into this category. Social impact investors, very similar to institutional investors. They're working with other people's money. People that want to invest their money for a stable return. But also with the goal of providing a positive social or environmental return. So they want to invest, but they want to feel good about what they're investing in. So EFM would sort of fall into that category, where they have a dual purpose income. And so it was explained to me like this, is that they have investors that are okay, maybe they don't have to have a 8 or 9% return, but maybe they would sell for something less, but feel good about that the wood that is going into the market from the timber harvest is sustainably sourced. It follows a higher standard. And that the communities where these forests are at and these mills are receiving steady and stable income instead of kind of boom and bust cycle. So, and then really quickly, tribal ownership, with them, their management activities are not so much based on the income it produces, but employing tribal employment of their workers, their contractors, cultural values such as enhancement of growing cedar on the landscape, stream protection because fisheries is a huge deal to them, and hunting. So they have other goals, and you don't talk to them. They're not going to make money of their triple bottom line. They're not going to make money by selling their property. The property they get, they're keeping. And so they just have a different goal. Public land ownership, they're managed for the values of society as a whole. In some cases, fiduciary responsibility is a primary concern. Other priorities, though, might include, there's different types of government ownership, may include scientific research. We have a property we've been managing in municipal watersheds down in Oregon, where their goal is to keep the forest healthy so the water stays clean. Or multiple use management or even military training. Fort Lewis employs a lot of forestry folks. So, or conservation ownership. Conservation or ownership, the priority there is long-term restoration of habitat. And so while they may do some forest management activities, the goal is to move the forest to a different state than it is now. So a lot of the forests out here, have been managed over the years. They've been planted a certain way and with certain species and things like that. So they are what they are. And if you want to move that forest to a more diverse or larger diameter trees or whatever it is you want to do, you have to spend money. You have to do things to it. So that sometimes can be a challenge for conservation owners. Let's talk about state forest practice rules. With the exception, like I mentioned, of tribal and federal lands, all landowner groups are subject to the same state forest practice rules. An important context here is the Bold decision. So Washington has some of the most restrictive forest practice rules in the country. And a lot of that is due to the Bolt decision back in 74, which I'm paraphrasing here. It said that the tribes are co-managers of the fisheries resource. And in turn, because they're co-managers of the fisheries resource, the judge said that also means the water, because the water has to be clean and healthy in order for the fish there to be a fisheries resource. So the Bolt decision set up a situation where not only the general public, but the tribes have input on things that affect water quality. And forest practices obviously have the potential to affect water quality. So that's important context of the forest practice rules. Modern forest practice rules were developed in the 1970s. Here's the 1976 rule book. So, the current rules were established in 1999, the forest and fish rule. Here's the one for that. And I gotta tell you, this is well used. There's a lot in there. There's two sections to the rule book. One is the law, the RCW, and then the second part is the board manual. Because the board manual tells you exactly how to implement the rule. Like the rule says you can't log a river channel migration zone. And so the board manual says, here's how you go find the channel migration zone. So like on the ground, take these measurements, look for these things, that's how you figure it out. So it's kind of good that way, because they're very complex rules. And in fact, they're so complex, they got this it's kind of like almost like a cartoon book, but it's like forest practices simplified, which is awesome. We go to all of our interns because it's like sort of easy reading and has good diagrams about things and stuff. So, but they had to develop that book, just to make it a little bit easier to understand. So the rules are designed to protect public resources. Public resources would include water quality, fish habitat, even soils. The long-term productivity of soils is a concern to the general public. So no matter if you're on private land, state land, whatever, the legislator says the public has an interest. Here's the sort of good thing. Actually, it's a really good thing. Because if you remember back in the 80s and 90s, like there was a lot of pressure on forestry companies. We need larger stream buffers, or we need more habitat for birds, or whatever it was. And this was coming from the public, like let's vote on no herbicide spraying. And while you may agree with all these things, the impetus for those things was just coming without science. It was like basically like raise your hand and say what you don't agree with. And if you can get enough legislatures to vote for that, then you could change the law. Well, the good part about that with the Forest and Fish Agreement back here in 2001, they said that here's the rules, okay? Here's for instance, the fish stream buffer rule. It's 105 feet. In that 105 feet, you have to have so many trees, they have to be so big a size and things like that. Because that's what the streams need for shade, etc. So somebody says, hey, we've been out there, that's not enough. The streams are getting too much sunlight, the temperature is going up, things like that. So if you can get the DNR to agree to that, then they will initiate an adaptive management study. And the study would be something like, okay, we're going to go out and scientifically determine if this is true. Are the streams really getting too warm? So they'll set up like temperature gauges in unlogged areas, and they'll set them up in areas that are going to be logged next year. And then they'll go back for 5 years after the logging and check the temperatures. And then the scientific work is all put together and summarized and then peer reviewed before it's taken to the Forest Practice Board to determine if a change is warranted. A good example with the rules I just mentioned, the fish stream rules, originally started out in 2001. I think it was 275 basal area, technical term, but 275 basal area per acre in the RMZ. Well, after about 7, 8, 10 years maybe, they realized it wasn't enough and they upped it to 325. So you had to leave more trees, more big trees. And so they changed it. After some of you remember the Oso slide, big slide up in Northwest Washington was horrible. A lot of people died, but they were concerned about the impact of that slide. So they decided to, let's go out in the Washington, in the working forest and see what's happening with slides. So they started documenting and measuring and things like that. And that triggered some rule changes about how harvest happens around these unstable areas. So adaptive management is really an awesome thing, but it's had won't say it's perfect, but I would say it gives forest landowners certainty to continue to manage their land as forest. And that's really important because you don't want parcels up and down Highway 110 to La Push along the river, developed. Which is the alternative. If landowners can't manage their property as a working forest, then what are they gonna do with it? They're gonna monetize it somehow. So how do we want our land to be? So that's really provided a lot of certainty in the rules because it took the emotion out of it and put science into it. Oregon, one last thing on that, Oregon just passed a new rule package last year. They were 20 years behind Washington. We were still doing 35, 40-foot buffers in Oregon 3 years ago. We're still doing 40-foot buffers on fish creeks. They changed their rules and they adopted this adaptive management approach as well, so that things could be scientifically reviewed. So that's really important. Also, since 2006, if you do a forest practice could be a timber harvest. It could be like putting in a culvert on a stream, thinning, even invasive species control. If you're doing a forest practice, and you follow the rules, then you are covered by what's called a forest practice habitat conservation plan. And so this is really, it's impressive to begin with. The Washington, if you follow the forest practice rules, landowners will have coverage for more than 70 aquatic species and aquatic and riparian dependent species, including 13 populations of salmon and steelhead. So basically what it tells landowners, you follow the rules, we're not gonna come and say, you took an endangered species if you follow the rules. So that's really important. Again, we want forest landowners to have certainty to continue to own the land and continue to manage it as forests. So I think 70, it had to be a big deal for the federal government to give that kind of insurance. It's basically like an insurance policy to forest landowners. That I'm sure that wasn't easy to come by. So the last thing I want to talk about in development of strategy is certification. Certification is always a third-party thing, and it basically certifies that the companies or the landowner is following sustainable practices. So what does that look like? So it's a voluntary process, certifying that the landowner's operations are sustainable from a biological perspective. So what would that mean for like a company that owns 100,000 acres? Well, it could mean bigger stream buffers. It could mean having a sustained yield calculation. If you've been around forestry a little bit, you've probably heard sustained yield. That means we're not going to overcut. It means we're going to harvest a certain amount every year on a continuous basis. And it's not going to be the cut and run thing that we hear about sometimes. So it follows certification, ensures the landowners following certain standards. Generally, there's additional layers on top of the forest practice requirements that, and we'll talk about these. And nearly all forest landowners, large forest landowners are certified. So if you look at your cup, these probably don't have them in their Costco cups, but if you look at your cup, you'll see the little FSC logo on it or SFI logo on it. That means that that cup came from a sustainably certified forest. So one thing, the advantages of, so what does the landowner get out of certification? It provides assurance to the general public that they're adhering to standards, like forestry has a lot of awful things you read about in the newspaper sometimes, like, you know, there's these people in Indonesia and they're stealing these big trees out of the national park and things like that. Well, you know, under certification, it would be like, okay, let's see your permit. And then not only that, let's go out on the ground and see if you actually followed the rules that you're supposed to follow. So it's not just a paper shuffle, it's a real deal. There's, you know, on the ground audits and things like that. So it gives assurance to end users that the wood comes from a sustainable source. And we haven't seen really any increased prices from the mill. Like if you said, hey, my timber is FSC certified, you don't really see an increase in price. There is, you know, maybe on the East Coast and certain specialty markets, we've heard of that. But the one thing it does do is, you know, the vendors like Port Townsend Paper or Uniform Brands, they're asking, like, is this, what certification are you? And they have a limit on how much non-certified wood they can take. And so we're kind of heading that way to where it has to be certified one way or another. But all certification also, because of that assurance that the operation is sustainable, it makes it easier to get into things like carbon markets, conservation easements, public works projects. You know, you've heard of the LEED or LEED standard for public building. They have to, for government buildings, they have to get this beautiful wood from a certified forest to show that this wasn't just, you know, stolen somewhere or gotten some, taken out of a riparian area somewhere or something. So, so a lot of government agencies require that certification standard. So there's, you know, other factors on strategy. I'll kind of move on a little bit quicker here. It's just, you know, if a landowner has conservation easements or wildlife plans, you know, their access and ownership patterns all kind of go into developing a strategy. So let's talk about the strategies. I got pictures up on Tye Ridge. I thought the foxglove were beautiful up there. So here's a comparison then of those different groups, you know, back to that, we talked about the different classes of ownership. So rotation age, that's the year when forests are typically harvested. And these next numbers I give you are going to be really general. You know, you can point out specific exceptions and things like that. But being as we've worked for most of the landowners out here, we have some idea of what that range is. So rotation age, just on average. With small landowners, it happens when they usually have a financial need. So it might vary. It might vary from 30 to 60 to 80. It just depends on, you know, maybe a kid's going to college, maybe somebody's retiring, vacation, whatever. They have a need, they're going to do their harvest. So it doesn't really apply to them. Corporate or institutional owners on the peninsula here, considering how fast trees grow and what the soil is like and things like that, the rotation age is generally 35 to 40 years. And so for social impact investors, maybe 50 plus, they want to grow trees longer and grow them bigger for a lot of reasons. Same with government and tribal. Their government agencies are generally kind of bound by, you know, long-term plans and laws that regulate their work. So you can see, you know, sort of in the space between corporate and government, this guy might have 2 harvests in the same period this guy has 1. So that's true. Here's another kind of comparison. This is about riparian zone width. So small landowners, typically they'll follow, Washington forest practice rules. So on a fish stream that's on site class 3 soils, that would be 94 to 105 feet, where basically that boundary is marked. And on a non-fish bearing stream, right now, the rule is you have to leave a 50-foot buffer on 50% of the stream length. So, but then compare that to, say, a corporate then they would have SFI certification. So they're also are basically following the same forest practice rules. There's other differences that we'll point out with SFI, but the RMZ width isn't really one of them. Now, go to social impacted investors following FSC rules. I shouldn't say rules, they're the FSC certification standard. Voluntarily, generally they'd be leaving a 150-foot buffer on a fish stream. And their non-fish stream, non-fish perennial, would be a 100-foot buffer for 100% of the reach. Government and tribal, kind of somewhere in the middle. So that, like DNR, they have their own HCP that regulates their buffers, and so they're somewhere, but you can see even with the government and the tribal, they're significantly more than the forest practice minimum. So remember, the forest practice minimum, that's the science tested, like we've looked at fish and what they need, how much shade they need, how much clean water they need, how much large woody debris how much, structure into the stream over time. Forest practice has determined that these amounts are enough to meet the needs of fish, wildlife, things like that. But these landowners have chosen to leave more. Another comparison. This is a couple, kind of a laundry list of a couple of things. So clear cut unit size. In our forest practices, you can do up to 240 acres with a IDT movement. And you have to leave 5 trees per acre in your clear cut. The SFI standard, you can't have a clear cut that big. You have to be a maximum of 120 acres. Basically the same trees per acre. But one other important difference, which you remember we mentioned on certification, to be certified, you have to be sustainable. So that's what that last column is, annual allowable cut. So are they calculating how much they can actually cut annually to prove that it's sustainable over time? And so forest practice doesn't require that, but certification requires that. Social impact investors using FSC certification, the maximum is 60 acres on a clear cut size. And government and tribal, it really varies, somewhere between 40 and 120 trees per acre. The upland tree retention significantly bumps up on these last 2 as well. So the summary of that is with these last 2 groups, the rotation age is longer, they're growing longer, bigger trees. The riparian zones are larger than the minimum required. The clear cuts are smaller. They're leaving more trees in the upland than required. And they are proving their sustainability by calculating their annual allowable cut. And the annual allowable cut has to be verified by the auditor. So on an annual basis. So anyways, the sort of interesting thing is, okay, this is kind of the thing that I mentioned, I thought would be beneficial to kind of bring it all together. When you look at the landscape where we work, some people would call it mostly the Olympic experimental forest. But so look, if you look at those, remember we mentioned those last 2 categories, the state, government, tribal, and the social impact investors. I know we're using a different standard, increased protection, things like that. Well, so look at the landscape and who owns what then. If we took those three more restrictive categories, the tribes, EFM, social impact, and the agency, federal agency or state agency, then you see all these lands in the blue, the green, and the brown are all following a much higher standard than forest practice requires. So there must be some benefit to that. You know, and we'll talk about that, but the thing that I think is interesting is when the legislature or the forest practice board is out there kind of arguing over, you know, how much should we leave, or what should we change, or, you know, what should we approve for adaptive management? I really don't think they realize that landowners out here are already following a different standard. And yes, ownership can change. You know, the state ownership and the tribal ownership's not gonna change. You know, the green might someday, but even if the green changes, 10 years from now, you're gonna have a legacy of bigger buffers on the landscape, smaller clear cuts, bigger trees in the riparian areas, things like that. So even if it changes, there's still this period of time that we're operating in today where the forest management is much different than the minimum forest practice requirements. So I don't want to blow my last slide, but I personally think that that's something that we need to do a better job is being able to talk to people about that. We should have full transparency as forest landowners. We're doing the right thing. We're doing what scientifically is what we're supposed to do and more. One thing I didn't put on this slide, I thought about it after this afternoon, was another major achievement that the 2001 forest practice rules, it required all forest landowners to inventory and correct every fish barrier on their forest land property. And in the case of Rainier, there were hundreds and hundreds of fish barriers that over this period of about 15 to 20 years, they spent millions of dollars repairing fish barriers, putting in bridges where there used to be culverts, putting in like it's very common for us to put in a 9 or 10 foot culvert. Anyways, put in a really big culvert where there used to be a 24, because we want full fish passage. Fish need to have access to the streams. We can't have a barrier. So Rainier and everybody, all the other forest landowners subject to forest practice rules, went out and spent millions of dollars and corrected these. They had to be completed. I think there was an extension, had to be completed by 2021. But that was a huge achievement. So where are they looking now? What's the problem with the fish now? Well, you see them out on the highway, right? You know, they're repairing all these highway and county road barriers and things like that because they weren't subject to the forest and fish rule, but the forest landowners were. So if it feels like we have just a little chip on our shoulder about everybody else, because remember, those county roads and those highways, they're down in the lowlands and we're up here and those fish are getting blocked down below us. And so I like to say that in our area here, we are blessed with fish. Oh my gosh, you go out in the dicky, the coho this big, they'll be halfway up a mountainside. You can't stop them. They'll be like on a rainy day, they'll be swimming down the ditch. And we have to protect all these things. And that's a big part of our job as state forest management, is to go out and find all these creeks, map them, say, here, you know, here's the fish, this is the protection we need, things like that. And then bring the tribes, Department of Fisheries, DNR out and get them to agree with us or change our way of thinking, whichever is the case. But that was a huge achievement for forest landowners to get all that done. And the county and the state and others are still struggling with getting their barriers corrected. So I want to talk briefly because Tom mentioned, you know, what about the Rainier transition? So we're going to talk for a minute about EFM. They own the lands in light green here. So basically from Lake Ozette down into the Nolan Creek, Claylock Creek, There's even a little piece down at Clearwater. So these are lands that they primarily purchased from Rainier. But they have owned land on the peninsula since 2005. We've been working with them since 2005. Was their first purchase. This is out in the Dickey area. The Dickey River flows right through it. Called our Dickey River property, out on the 9,000. And that was a property that was, you remember Milwaukee Land Company used to have a little office way over here by what do you call that little bar there? Places, yeah, they used to have a little office right there. And they were great. They were a legacy of the railroad when the railroad or the federal government gave the railroads land to help finance rail construction. And there was a railroad that connected out here and from Clown Bay. And anyways, that was their first purchase, and they made several since then. They currently manage about 96,000 acres on the peninsula. So just point them out real quick. The blue is the stuff that they just bought from Rainier. The brown is what we call the Palawa area here. This is Dead Dog Flats area here. These both used to be Rainier properties. Out on the Clear, west of the 5,000, and then the Suez River property up there. So about 96,000 acres. So EFM is based out of Portland. We're their on the ground manager here. I mean, their staff is, half a dozen people. They're mostly financial planners and things like that. And so they've entrusted us with doing the operational management of their property. So they're an investment management firm that acquires forests and they implement climate smart strategies in the Northwest and beyond. So totally about 96,000 acres on the peninsula, but they have about 200,000 acres total. And so where some companies might just focus on only the timber revenue, they have investors, right? So remember I mentioned that the investors, they have an expectation of some financial return. So, but not just timber production, things like carbon credits, conservation easements of like really sensitive areas, and creating biodiversity. So how do you make money off of creating biodiversity? Well, if you are a conscientious, proactive landowner, and you want to, for instance, work with the federal government to make better murrelet habitat. So instead of leaving like this half a mile wide circle around each murrelet area untouched, if you have a good track record, they might say, hey, you could go ahead and thin that, and the trees will get bigger quicker, and and you agree to do that, and we'll agree to let you do that in a kind of expedited fashion. So it's like a conservation agreement. So so that's a way we're being kind of proactive. So like with the timber company, maybe we'll just put that line in and move on to the next harvest unit. So so they've been like I said, they're an investment company. They describe, this is from their website, they describe their management approach as the 5 R's of forest management. So the first R is rotation, and generally what's different with them is they extend the rotation age by 15 or 20 years over a normal forest landowner. Reserves, we identify these kind of high conservation areas like here, this shows a picture of the Dickey River, but maybe wetlands and or some unique habitat like out on Dead Dog Flats, there's some big remnant cedar around, that were called non-merge, but they have a lot of value in them. But we identify those areas and work to conserve those. Retention, I mentioned our retention is a little different. where we purposely retain more trees in the upland. And, one thing people say, and I'm probably the most skeptical about this, but, like, if you see trees left out in a clear cut out there, and, oh, it blew over, well, you failed. All around here, the wind blows a lot. If you think about it, part of our goal is to have sustainable long-term forestry, and that includes building the soil. So that tree blowing over and over time getting broken down into the duff layer is a good thing. Because logging causes disturbance to the duff layer, and so, also remember that 70 species under the, Forest Practice Act that are protected. A lot of those are like salamanders that are dependent on crawling under those places and hiding out and living. So the down logs are not a bad thing. Relationships, this is a really important one for us. We're gonna talk about just a little more when we close here, is relationships. In other words, they value the community they work in. So I can tell you that, EFM has been up here, with us. And, we've been several times to the county commissioners, the Economic Development Council, the city of Forks, to the new mill that's coming in out here. We're concerned about the local economy. They're concerned. And, they want to make sure they do things that are going to help and not hinder the local economy. So, those relationships are important, but also, relationships with tribes and other constituents that, also work out on the land. Employment, the first thing we did when, EFM got this property from Rainier, like within 2 weeks, Brett and Andrew were working on contracts to get, local road contractors, loggers, silviculture workers under contract to work on the property. And then we placed sort of an emphasis on restoration. What this means basically is they put, extra effort into identifying these kind of problem areas. Like, sort of, it used to be common back in the 80s where you would take all the logs out of a stream because you didn't want to like block the fish from going upstream. Well, turns out the fish need the logs in the stream. And so we do, we work with Wild Salmon Center, the tribes to put logs and trees back into the stream. And so the difference is, I think there is that we proactively look for it and we work towards those goals, because a healthy forest includes fish. So local impact, they rely on our local workforce here for all their operations up here, for forest inventory, timber harvesting, silviculture, minor forest products. So we estimate that like every day, when we count up our contractors and people that work on the property, every day, there's 40 to 50 people heading out in the woods about 6 a.m., 7 a.m. to work on this property, doing various things. So that's a big thing. And they realize that it's very important, because not only is there 40 or 50 bodies working, those are generally family wage, well-paying jobs that come back into our community, that support the grocery store and pay taxes and things like that. Yeah, then the financial impact on operations is significant. I don't want to give up any secrets, any trade secrets here, but it used to be that like a logger would come to a small owner and they say, hey, I'll give you 50-50 for your timber. I'll take 50% and you keep 50%. And we used to tell people, no, don't ever do that. Well, I gotta tell you, prices have gone up, things like that. It's not such a bad deal right now, especially if you have hemlock. I would take it. But really, that's, so for every dollar that a landowner makes off of like a timber harvest, somewhere between 40 and 60 cents is going to the logger, to the road builder, to the tree planter, to all those people that work right here. It's not the landowners are getting the whole dollar. They get the dollar, but then they start writing checks, so it's really important for our community, this working forest. So another kind of different thing is, that our harvest, remember that annual allowable harvest includes both even age, clear cut. We call it variable retention because we leave a lot of trees out there, and commercial thinning. So commercial thinning is part of our, management program. Also, when we do reforestation, we emphasize using the right trees for the right site, including like putting spruce where spruce should be, putting cedar where cedar should be, and developing diverse stands instead of monocultures. I mentioned the collaborative. We've been out and met with a number of people, and those discussions are ongoing. I had another one today, and just talking about the lack of housing in the Forks area. This is one of the subjects that they wanted to talk about, because we have a mill starting up out here, and most of it will be local employment, but there might be a few specialized people, I don't know, millwright, electrician, whatever it is. They're gonna need to bring in a few of their own people, and those people, need a place to live. And when we used to hire a number of people from out of the area, then we smartened up. But they would move up here and be like, well, where can we live? And like, there'd be like 3 listings on the the realty website, and they'd be worse and more worse and the worst possible, I mean, there'd be no choices, is what I'm saying. If a guy wanted to have a few acres and a dog and, let alone the affordability thing. So Forks has a real housing problem, and that we're talking a little bit about. Also a big thing to everybody here, no more access permits. Rainier charges access permit for going out and recreational use of their lands. We don't do that. It would be similar to DNR, where if you pull up to a gate, and you can see the sign there to say walk-in is allowed. If you drive out the Goodman Main Line and the gate's open, go ahead and drive out there. If the gate's open, go ahead and use it. So that's our policy, is that recreation should be allowed. And good timing on that. I was just reading an article about down in Pacific County where some German company bought all this land, and they're not letting any public use, and then the neighbors or the people that live there are not happy about that. But we believe in public use. Want to just give a quick shout out to our partners that the 10,000 Years Institute are awesome with invasive species, and we're partners with them. We work with them all the time, and they're out helping us. I got a call from a landowner about some silver weed. I don't know what it was called, but I have no idea what it looks like. But we called them, and they're like, yeah, we'll go look at it. We'll help you figure this out, what it takes to control it, because it's not supposed to be out there. The tribal fisheries, they'll come out and help us work on our timber sales as far as like what's adequate protection and things like that, so we can sort of be proactive about how we put in our boundaries and things. Wild Salmon Center worked on a number of restoration projects with them. DNR, why would DNR be up there? They're regulating us usually, but we've had them out to look at root rot pockets. They have a forest health specialist that come out and they come out and look at your forest and help you determine what's happening there. So real quickly, a couple challenges of migrating to a longer rotation. So a lot of the stands that we're getting at age 35 are just like this. They're dense, generally monocultures, Doug fir, hopefully. But these were meant to be clear cut at age 35. So you'll notice it's all stem. There's very little green up here. So if you were to try to thin that, and there's less than 35% live crown, there's a good chance either you're gonna get a bunch of blowdown, or the trees are just gonna kind of sit there and stagnate and not really respond to the thinning. So why did these landowners harvest at age 35? Very simple. The market here in Port Angeles, 8 inches on top of the first log, so 36 feet. When it's 8 inches, that's when you cut it. And that around here usually happens at age 35. Because at age 36, they could have a 1-year stand already grown. And they could be on their way to their next, if they let it go to 40, they'd have a 5-year stand growing. So that's the thinking anyway, so how they looked at things. So how do we move stands that look like this to an older age. Well, some of them you can't. Some of them, you pretty much have to harvest and start over. But we also employ like commercial thinning strategies. That's the bottom picture there. Where if they have more green crown, we can go in and thin them. But the real problem is like forest practice rules have yet to recognize this, that when we leave a fish buffer and it looks like this, those trees aren't gonna be big. They're not gonna grow big. They're not gonna grow big trees for the stream. They're probably gonna stagnate or blow over because they're gonna have that long slender, they call it noodle factor. So forest practices is prescribing this. And what we really need to grow big trees is more like this. So we want people to understand that, forest management, active forest management, is a good thing. And one thing we've been doing is employing alternate plans. They're kind of a pain. You have to bring everybody and their brother, Department of Ecology, the tribes, Fish and Wildlife, DNR, and anybody else who wants to go. You have to go out and bring them out there and look at it and you say, here's what we want to do different. And if you can get them to agree, then you can maybe do something different. So we're kind of proactive about that as well. Another thing is we're trying to do a better job of protecting our soil. So this will be a kind of normal look that you'll see on the highway. You got slash piles. You can't see it very well, but this is like a skid road. It's kind of bare dirt in the middle. It would be better to look like this when we're done, because this is going to build soil. Those trees are going to break down. They're going to build soil for the future. When we were doing the due diligence for EFM to buy this property, one thing we really noticed was there were a lot of the big bare areas where, things had been bulldozed out, for different reasons. And like, what happens when you have a bare area in the forest? Scotch bloom, it immediately gets taken over by invasives. So, but not just the invasives, is we want to build that soil layer for the future. So one strategy we've come up with is, this is up on the Chimicum Reach Forest that we used to manage, cut to length logging. So cut to length logging, the machine goes up to the tree like this, puts its arms around it, cuts it down, takes it like this, cuts the log off, takes it like this, cuts the limbs off. All the limbs stay out in the woods. So the limbs don't end up in those piles in the road. They end up down here on the forest floor. So that's one strategy, in addition to a lot of other things like, limiting harvest during really wet periods and, other things that you can do. I think might be the last slide. Okay. This is, I really think is important, is like, we should be proud, as forest landowners, even just people in the West End, they have lots of questions about what's happening there. And I won't say that clear cuts are beautiful to everybody, they're not. Sometimes they look terrible, but if we explain, how we do things, why we're doing things, what protection measures we put in place, if we're able to explain that to people, they go a long ways. So right here in Forks, we've had people out like Paul Newman's daughter, and the lead guitarist of Pearl Jam, I forget his name, Stone or whatever, you got a funny name. Anyways, taking him out on forestry tours and showing him like, this is what happens and this is why we did it. And so educating the public is such an important thing. And of course, the chamber has a big role in that with their logging and mill tours, just getting out on the sites where somebody can explain, yeah, those trees are all there because it's protecting a wetland. Things like that. People don't necessarily realize that sort of thing. So, I have time for questions. Actually, I try to use it all my time.
Yeah, well, if folks do need to leave, we understand, but if you have a few minutes, I want to stay for questions, we can open it up. So folks, either on Zoom, or in person, a question. Sure. Yeah. I
comment that not everybody in here hasn't heard this already, but it looks pretty nice on the surface of the water, as Jeff explained. You've got different owners out there with different values and everybody's kind of doing their thing, but a couple feet under the surface, there's a war going on that never goes away. You're not leaving enough, I'm gonna leave some more, so we're gonna sue you. And so you look at Riverside, and you know coming to town, are they gonna have a sustainable log supply off the turf that's gonna, they're gonna try to buy logs on that market? And it's a rough sea to try to do that and be, where you can reach sleep at night and know that you're gonna have a good sale next month. So that, and there's, for every document that's signed that says, yeah, we all agree, that's the way we're gonna conduct business, that's not good. The ink isn't dry on the paper before the first suit is filed and says, no, we're gonna go back and do that again, boys, that's not good, that's what we want. Then you said 10, we want 100. You got 100, we want 100. Whatever it is, so and it's just not a sniffle, it's just a reality of the game that goes, and, you know, it's winnable, you know, education. Is a big part of it, because the people that come to Chamber of Commerce walking in those stores, every given week, I can have people from Ohio, Alberta, Hong Kong, and everywhere, and they're all like the dry slime. What is it here, what you're down out there, and I've only had one bad apple in 20+ years, it really hated what we do. Most of them, you could feed them for 12 hours, and they just ask for more, you know, so education is a rewarding thing to see people soak that up and be positive about it.
We did a legislative tour here on the Chimicum property. And there was a lady from Port Townsend area. And most of the group was very skeptical. And we had Becca Bar was out there thinning for us. And so of course we saved these couple trees by the road. So when the tour got there, you know, they could cut these trees and show them how it's done. And the guy from Becca Bar, you know, he did his thing, cut the tree, then got out and explained the benefits of thinning. And this is just not a forester, just a logging operator. He got out and explained the benefits of thinning. And this older gal says, hey, would you mind if I sat up in that cab? And like, it was a complete 180 for her. And just to learn more about it. And so I think a lot of people don't understand, and really this thing about putting together the cumulative effects of voluntary things that have been happening out in the landscape, I think are big. I mean, the down Olympia, they're quibbling over 10 more feet or something. And people are already doing it right here. You know, so maybe the problem is something else, but. Yeah, that's a good point, Randy.
First of all, thank you so much. This is really awesome. I'm so fascinated by your PFM's approach and really appreciative of their use of those collaborative approach, and also integrating some non-monetized valuation perspectives, you know, including integration and sociocultural benefits and restoration and such. And in your experience with working with them, do you find that that kind of, I guess, model and infrastructure balances the monetary benefits with the sociocultural benefits? And do you think that there's a potential for that to expand to other types of land, like the corporate and other small, and in that balance?
Sure. Well, I think that Chimicum Forest is a good example of like a partnership that we had with the folks in Chimicum. So PFM owned the property, and the folks in Chimicum wanted to have their own forest. And so they sort of had this vision of like, we wanna go up on the site, we wanna cut these trees down, and then out here, there's a guy on the road with his portable sawmill. He's gonna saw the boards up, and they're gonna take them down to the Chimicum farm stand and sell sustainable lumber. Like this guy, and look how much effort went into that piece of lumber, you know, and they sort of have that model with agriculture, right? Where they're, you know, they're growing their own things there and selling them in their store. And so EFM fostered that relationship and eventually transferred the land to Chimicum Lands Trust. And so we have these partnerships around. I think, unfortunately, that the bottom line, you know, is mostly financial with most other landowners. It's important to this landowner too. But we know, for instance, that we can't operate in the way we want to operate without a viable community, without a viable workforce, without a viable mill. Do you know that you've heard all these maybe bad things about carbon projects? You know, one thing you have to have a carbon project, you have to have a mill. there has to be a way for you to show that you can mill up these products in order for you to get a benefit from maybe slowing down or doing management in a different way. So mills are an important part of the equation. Employment's an important part of the equation. We have kept records of people working, how many people are working, things like that. So it's extremely important to this company.
We have a question on Zoom, if I could ask it. So for everyone in person, the question from Susan Carroll is, either as part of the 5 Rs program, restoration, reserves, etc., are there any major land use or forestry changes planned by EFM in the next 5 to 10 years that will affect neighboring landowners and local stakeholders, or that they should be aware of?
Sure. Not that I can think of, access is always important, especially for people that own land out in working for us. And so, but we try to do a pretty good job of communicating, when these kind of things happen. So I would say none are anticipated. But we will be communicating, with our neighbors as things happen. So part of our FSC audit, they come in and look at all of our paperwork. Did you harvest too much? Did you have permits for everything you harvested? Did you talk to your neighbor when you log next to them? Oh, you did? I'm gonna call them up. The FSC auditor calls all of our neighbors and say, do you have any beef with these guys? So, I mean, it's not just something on paper. Same, I gotta say, for the DNR enforced practices. So we just finished doing a week of compliance monitoring. And what that is DNR comes out after the logging and measures the buffers to make sure you left every tree you're supposed to leave. And we came through with flying colors. Thank you, guys, appreciate it. But yeah, I mean, it's these rules that we're talking about aren't just on paper. There is some meat behind them. There are checks, so. John?
Yeah, as far as your management, you were talking about like endangered species and stuff. Do you guys check for like salamanders and different things like that when you're doing a?
Yeah, so we do, we run everything through the screen of forest practices, which keeps a database on those sort of things. We don't physically check necessarily for salamanders. The sort of important thing is we follow the rules about it. But there are things we do check for instance, murrelet habitat. We have to go out and look and measure trees and things like that to determine if there's suitable murrelet habitat. So in some cases, yes, in the case of salamander. Dan?
I'd like to compliment to Jeff on your forest management one-on-one. I know a lot of the folks here in the audience. I've worked with you, look forward to them. And just to elaborate a little bit about the forest practice commission, there are five resources that they're focused upon, and they're water quality, wildlife, fish, capital improvements, and cultural resources. And that's pretty much the entirety of it. The protection for all of those changes over time as different pressure are placed upon those particular reasons. Washington State itself saw a conflict between the logging industry and those who were affected by these or needed these resources protected. And they wanted to, first and foremost, maintain a viable forest product industry. And so with the evolution of those rule books, like you showed us at the start, that was the first forest practice rule book that had, prior to that, forest practice regs were leave seed trees and cut all the stems. They're very simple. That orange book started into stream protection, 50% shade, the water quality, water temperature, pretty much focusing on the tribes were very interested in co-managing that resource. And as time progressed and the rule became more and more complicated, they were still faced with endangered species issues, such as the orcas. And so in '87, a tender fish and wildlife. I think that's the right chronology. No, it's after '87, I guess it was a 2000 rule package, timber fish and wildlife. Industry actually sponsored that. They agreed to larger buffers. Kind of put us on the path to where we are now. I retired from DNR in 2001. Worked for Jeff for 8 more years. And even since then, these rules have changed. I've seen the light flow waters decade in their entirety. So it's an ever changing profession. It benefits many people in the public good. So with that in mind, those changes are going to continue. I personally have benefited from managing timberland. Bruce has a parcel of land that I developed on River One. I've spent my adult life over there, most of my adult life over there, with DNR, with Jeff. And just keep in mind that it's an industry you're protecting and public resource. So melding of the two.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. One thing I had on that slide was with the forest practice regulations, as you mentioned, forest and was that there's water quality, soil, wildlife. What am I forgetting? But timber, a viable timber industry was kind of the 5th pillar of this agreement, because they didn't want anybody to be able to dominate and say, no, you're not important. The timber industry is the owner of most of these lands, so they need to be at the table when decisions are made.
Maybe let's have one more question and then we could wrap up and have some. Okay.
What do you think about fixing the issue you mentioned of people in 35-year-old stand and trying to turn it into a window and trying to transform it into a longer stand? What do you think about corridor land and some of the places where they give more money, we sort of break up the not in too many small trees? And then we thought about where done much of corridor.
Yeah, the markets have been terrible for, we're getting 1990s prices for our logs right now. And so they haven't allowed us to do things like, for instance, cable thinning, things like that. So it's really limited us. We sort of need better markets, but I can assure you we have plans on the table for when markets improve to kind of diversify the things that we're doing. But if you go out the La Push Road, there's a good testament. You can see several different things that this landowner has implemented. You see right off the bat on the left, you'll see, kind of a variable retention harvest where we left trees out there. Keep going past the Cleve Junction. You see a big thinning where we thinned, 150, 200 acres, because we could grow that sand forward. So we employ, several different strategies, and when we get better markets, we'll be able to do even more. So.
Well, thank you so much. Maybe if there's other burning questions, if we could definitely hang around for another couple minutes and we can ask them kind of in smaller groups. But thank you all so much for coming, and thank you so much for presenting this evening. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Thanks for coming.